Welcome to our deep dive into a topic that's been generating a lot of buzz: how a second Trump presidency, heavily influenced by Elon Musk, could redefine U.S. space strategy.
You've shared some really insightful articles analyzing this potential partnership, and let's just say it's going to be a wild ride exploring their shared ambitions, potential conflicts, and what it could all mean for the future of space exploration.
What strikes me is how this partnership brings together two figures known for their bold visions and disruptive approaches.
On the one hand, you have Trump's America First agenda and his focus on projecting U.S. power, even in space, with the creation of Space Force.
And then you have Musk, the tech innovator, who's dead set on making humans a multiplanetary species with Mars as the ultimate goal.
It's like a collision of two different sci-fi movies.
And yet, there's a surprising amount of overlap in their space ambitions. Both Trump and Musk are huge proponents of private companies leading the charge in space.
Absolutely. Trump's policies during his first term already pushed for greater commercial involvement, and with Musk as a close advisor, we could see that trend accelerate dramatically.
Think about it. SpaceX, Musk's company, is already a major player in the space industry, and their success with reusable rockets like the Falcon 9 has significantly lowered launch costs.
And let's not forget Starship, SpaceX's next-generation spacecraft designed for both lunar and deep space missions.
It's already been chosen for NASA's Artemis program, which aims to return astronauts to the moon. So we're already seeing their visions align in a very concrete way.
Speaking of Artemis, it's a perfect example of how Trump and Musk's goals might converge. Trump's Space Policy Directive 1 set the stage for a return to the moon, and Musk's Mars ambitions see the moon as a crucial stepping stone.
But here's where things get interesting. Their timelines might not match up perfectly.
That's right. While Trump's focus might be on achieving a lunar landing within his term, perhaps as a display of American strength, Musk is playing the long game.
He's all about establishing a permanent human presence on Mars. And that's a goal that could take decades to realize.
And that difference in perspective could lead to some fascinating tensions.
Will a Trump administration be willing to invest in Musk's long-term vision? Or will they prioritize shorter-term achievements that deliver more immediate political wins?
And then there's the question of how this partnership might impact NASA.
Musk has been vocal about his belief that the agency is too bureaucratic and needs to be streamlined. He's even suggested consolidating some of NASA's centers, which has caused a lot of anxiety within the agency.
It's certainly a bold proposal, and one that could have major implications for the future of space exploration.
Would a Trump administration back Musk's plans to shake up NASA?
And if so, what would that mean for the agency's traditional role and its workforce?
There's also the financial side to consider. SpaceX already holds lucrative government contracts, and some critics argue that Musk's involvement in a Trump administration could create conflicts of interest.
Would he use his influence to steer more contracts towards SpaceX, potentially at the expense of other companies or even NASA itself?
It's a valid concern, and one that will likely be debated fiercely. But it's worth noting that Musk has also proposed using his expertise to tackle government inefficiency as a whole.
Imagine if he could bring his innovative, fast-paced approach to other areas of government beyond just space exploration.
It's almost hard to imagine, right?
But then again, both Trump and Musk are known for defying expectations.
Exactly, and that unpredictability is what makes this potential partnership so fascinating.
It's a high-stakes gamble with the potential to reshape the future of U.S. space strategy, and perhaps even humanity's place in the cosmos.
And speaking of gambles, let's talk about the battle of the rockets. SpaceX's Starship versus NASA's Space Launch System, also known as the SLS.
This is where things could get really interesting, especially given Trump's previous praise for Starship.
It's a classic showdown. The new kid on the block, Starship, designed for full reusability and touted as a game changer in terms of cost and capability, versus the established workhorse, the SLS, which has been in development for years and represents a significant investment of taxpayer dollars.
And remember, a lot of jobs are tied to the SLS.
Would a Trump-Musk administration be willing to disrupt the status quo, potentially impacting those jobs, to fully embrace Starship?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, and the answer could have far-reaching implications not just for the space industry, but also for communities like Cape Canaveral, which could experience a boom in activity if Starship takes center stage.
So we've got a shared ambition for space, but also conflicting timelines, potential conflicts of interest, and a major showdown brewing between competing space programs.
It's a lot to unpack, and we're just getting started.
Indeed. And as we delve deeper, we'll need to consider not just the technological and economic aspects of this potential partnership, but also the ethical and geopolitical dimensions.
How might a Trump-Musk agenda impact international cooperation in space?
Could it spark a new space race or lead to a more collaborative approach?
Stay tuned, because we'll be exploring those questions and more as we continue our deep dive into this fascinating and potentially transformative chapter in the history of space exploration. Picking up on that point about international cooperation, it's worth thinking about, how a Trump-Musk partnership might change things with other countries that are involved in space.
Especially with how much progress China's space program has been making these past few years.
They've landed a rover on the far side of the moon.
Which is amazing to think about how difficult that is.
Exactly, and they have their own space station they're building.
And they want to explore Mars, too.
It really makes you think how a Trump administration with Musk's ear, how would they handle this whole thing? Would they see this as a threat and we'd be looking at another space race? Or could we see something a bit more, like maybe some competition in some areas, but maybe places where it makes sense to work together?
It'll be interesting to see how Musk plays into all this,
Yeah.
He's talked about how impressed he is by China's engineering, and he's also said that the U.S. space program has way too much bureaucracy.
Yeah, he's even said that China will end up ahead of the U.S. in space if the U.S. doesn't get more efficient and more innovative. So maybe he ends up pushing for an approach that's a little more like, okay, we know we need to compete with China, but if it makes sense to work together, let's do it.
It's tricky, for sure. It's not just China either.
Right. You have Russia,
Europe, India, Japan, all doing their own thing in space.
with their own goals and their own interests.
The Trump-Musk administration will definitely have to walk a tightrope there.
Absolutely. And that's not even mentioning all the new private companies getting involved in space.
SpaceX is big, but there's
Blue Origin, you have Rocket Lab, Virgin Galactic.
all want a piece of the pie.
A Trump administration with Musk as an advisor, they'll need to figure out how to regulate this whole thing. We need innovation for sure, but then you have safety.
You have the environmental impact. What about national security?
Right? All these things to keep in mind.
And then there's the elephant in the room, space junk.
The more we launch up there, the higher the chances of things crashing into each other and creating all this dangerous debris.
Yeah, it's a growing problem.
And it's going to take everyone working together to solve it. So a Trump-Musk administration would really need to figure out how important this issue is to them, and if they're willing to actually work with other countries to make some rules and make sure people actually follow them when it comes to being responsible in space.
We're also talking about something much bigger here.
Yeah. The future of humanity in space.
Like, what are the ethics of exploring and maybe even colonizing other planets?
That's something philosophers and ethicists have been debating for decades.
Should we just treat other planets like they're ours for the taking? Or do we have a responsibility to protect them, even if it's not life as we know it?
Exactly. And how do we make sure everyone benefits from space exploration, not just a select few?
It's a lot for a Trump-Musk administration to consider.
Big questions with big consequences.
We've covered a lot. International relations, private companies, space junk, ethical questions.
Definitely complex stuff.
And as we keep going, we have to look at how their individual strengths and weaknesses might come into play.
Right. Trump's really bold. He's good at making deals.
And Musk, he's brilliant when it comes to the technical stuff, and he's relentless.
Together, that could really shake things up.
But there's always a risk.
Trump can be impulsive, and sometimes he doesn't really listen to the experts.
And Musk, well, he's known for making promises he can't always keep and pushing things to the limit.
Which means it's really important to have some safeguards in place.
Both within the government and in the private sector.
To make sure that any decision about space is made responsibly with the future of humanity in mind.
Speaking of safeguards, what about Congress? Even with Trump and Musk, they'd still need Congress to sign off on the money and give their support.
Absolutely. Congress has their own priorities.
Which might not line up with the White House.
It'll be important to see how all of that unfolds. Does Congress give them the money and the oversight to make sure we have a space program that's successful and sustainable?
And we can't forget about everyone else.
The public.
Public opinion matters when it comes to making policy.
Especially with something as awe-inspiring and transformative as space.
Though this is where things could get tricky.
Trump can be pretty polarizing, and Musk, he said some questionable things.
It could turn some people off.
Yeah, they'll need to figure out a way to bring people together and get everyone excited about space if they want their plans to work.
A tall order, but if they pull it off,
it could be huge.
the possibilities in space are endless.
Scientific discoveries, new technology, economic growth, maybe even a new sense of wonder for humanity.
But to get there, It's going to take planning and smart leadership and a real commitment to doing things the right way, ethically, and in a way that makes sure we can keep exploring.
It's complex and it's challenging, but the future of our species could depend on it.
Okay, so far we've talked about the big picture, the potential problems, the politics of it all.
But let's bring it back down to Earth.
Literally.
Let's look at what a Trump-Musk agenda could mean for specific places and industries.
Good idea. And I think a good place to start is Cape Canaveral in Florida.
The heart of American spaceflight for so long.
With everything already in place there, all the skilled workers, it's in a perfect spot to benefit from all this new interest in space.
Let's dive in. What kind of changes could we see in Cape Canaveral if private companies like SpaceX take charge? So yeah, with Artemis, it could really be a testing ground for Trump and Musk's whole vision for space.
Right now, it's all about NASA's Space Launch System.
The SLS?
But you mentioned how much Trump likes SpaceX's Starship. Could that change things?
It's definitely possible, and that would be a huge shift. The SLS has been in development forever. Billions of dollars spent, so many jobs connected to it. Going with Starship would be a huge gamble on Musk's tech.
It would show they're serious about pushing boundaries and going with private companies.
And Starship is designed to be fully reusable.
Which can save a ton of money.
Exactly, getting to the moon and beyond for way cheaper. That's something Trump would love.
But wouldn't it be risky to just drop the SLS like that?
Yeah.
It's been tested over and over again. Starship is still pretty new.
There's definitely risk, but both Trump and Musk, they aren't afraid of taking risks to get what they want.
Musk has even said that he expects some Starships to blow up during testing.
Yeah, it's part of how they design things. Try it out, see what happens, make changes.
That's so different from how NASA usually does things. They're all about being careful.
It makes you wonder how Trump and Musk would balance speed and safety,
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about sending people into space.
It's a big question, for sure.
Yeah.
And one that Congress and everyone watching will be asking. If they try to speed things up with Artemis, put getting things done quickly ahead of making sure everything's perfect, people are going to worry about the astronauts.
And we can't forget about the science part of Artemis.
It's not just about getting to the moon.
NASA wants to study the moon's geology, look for water ice, even test new tech for going to Mars.
And that's where Musk's influence could really shake things up.
He's all about Mars. The moon is just a pit stop on the way there for him.
So maybe a Trump-Musk administration would focus on things on the moon that help them get to Mars.
Like instead of just studying rocks, maybe they build a base on the moon that can be used to refuel spacecraft, or a place to try out new tech for Mars.
Exactly. And that could change how they work with other countries. Right now, Artemis involves working with Europe, Canada, Japan.
But if Trump and Musk want to put America first, it could cause some problems with those partnerships.
And what about having people live on the moon long term? Right now, the plan for Artemis is to have a base that can last, maybe even with private companies involved. What would Trump and Musk do with that?
Well, Musk wants to build a whole city on Mars.
So maybe they'll want to do the same thing on the moon.
With private companies taking the lead on building and running these lunar settlements.
That would be a huge change for NASA.
It raises all sorts of questions about who's in charge, who makes the money from it, how does it all work with international space law?
It's all new, and a Trump-Musk administration would be figuring it out as they go. Whatever they decide will have a lasting impact on how we explore space for years to come.
So we've seen how a Trump-Musk team could change U.S. space strategy. Everything from how NASA works to what spacecraft we use to how we deal with other countries. It's bold, it's ambitious, it could change everything.
And it makes you think about some really important things. What's the government's role? How much power do private companies have? What's the future of humanity in space? There aren't easy answers, and the stakes are high.
One thing's for sure, though. The next part of our journey into space is going to be a wild ride. There will be ups and downs, successes and failures.
I will all be watching to see what happens next.
And it's not just about watching. We all have a part to play in shaping what happens in space. Whether you're a scientist, an engineer, someone who makes policy, or just someone who's interested in what we say and what we do will decide how this adventure unfolds.
So thanks for joining us for this deep dive into what might happen with U.S. space strategy if Trump and Musk team up. We hope this got you thinking and encouraged you to stay involved in this conversation.
Because space exploration is about more than just rockets and tech.
It's about our values, our hopes and dreams, what kind of future we want for ourselves and for the generations that come after us.